Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Down in front. Welcome, everybody, to a lecture that I have been looking forward to giving for months now. It's a thrill for me. It's also a humbling honor for me to give the inaugural Dr. Walter Bortz Healthy Aging Lecture. My name is Dr. Chris Thompson. I teach at the University of San Francisco in the Department of Kinesiology. And this is going to be a wonderful journey for me to provide you this lecture. And I am very, very fortunate to have with me the individual that we are honoring with this lecture, Dr. Walter Bortz. Good to have you here, Walter. Now, at the summit, typically we'll ask questions like, how many of you in the audience are physical therapists? How many of you in the audience are personal trainers? How many of you in the audience are group exercise leaders? I think I'll start this lecture, particularly based on the title, with a question that probably has never been asked at the Health Fitness Summit before. Do we have any Trekkies in the audience? I love it. Raise your hands high and proud. We have Trekkies in the audience. Trekkies, those people who have followed Star Trek, can recognize this symbol here. What is that symbol? You can even do it. What is that symbol known as? Live long and prosper. A line made famous, it is called the Vulcan salute, a line made famous by Mr. Spock, the Vulcan.
He just passed away.
I would be remiss not to mention and send my sympathies out to Leonard Nimoy, who passed away after a long and healthy life. However, this lecture is certainly not to convert you all to Trekkies. We have many other objectives to accomplish today. And ideally, at the end of this session, we'll hopefully all be very aware of the extraordinary contributions to medicine and exercise made by Dr. Walter Bortz. I'll also touch on some primary effects of nutrient density and caloric restriction on both health and longevity in old age, identify some primary effects of exercise and physical activity on health and old age as well. And I'd like to give all of you some just little tidbits or pieces of nuggets that you can bring with you to work with patients, clients, people that you know, people you care about, to try to inspire them to live long and prosper. First, though, I'd like to spend some time talking about Dr. Walter Bortz. Dr. Walter Bortz attended Williams College in Western Massachusetts. He grew up in Western Pennsylvania, spent time in Western Mass. I'm a Massachusetts boy myself. He chose University of Pennsylvania for medical school over Harvard University. His father was a pillar of Harvard University's medical school, basically ran the place. And as any pioneer would choose to do, he chose to create his own path and went to University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Following his studies at University of Pennsylvania and achieving his MD, he went to Europe, studied at the famous Max Planck Institute, and published papers with giants in this field, including Per Olaf Ostrand and Bengt Saltin. Following his time in Europe, he came back to the United States, and he pretty much was a rock star. He had developed quite a professional reputation. He got numerous grants from NIH and other funders, and authored over 100 scientific publications during his time as a highly active academic. Probably most impressive, though, was the fact, and continues to be the fact, he is married to his wife, Ruth Ann, now for 63 plus years. Well done. We're going to have a few Bortzisms throughout the course of the presentation today. And this is one of my favorites. And this rings true. Something that previously was unknown and not believed. Aging is not a disease. It's simply a process. And in order to address it, it needs a different paradigm. Truer words have never been spoken. And during Dr. Bortz's career, he has made it his career to carry the torch for physical activity and exercise. A famous publication, a game-changing publication, Disuse in Aging, published in 1982 in the Journal of the American Medical Association. In fact, when I attended grad school at University of Kansas to get my master's degree, I was transitioning from another career we might touch on a bit later. I used to be a weatherman. My thesis advisor, Dr. Mike Bembin, a fantastic man, one of my people that really had a major impact on both me personally and professionally. He handed me a publication when I first got to campus. He said, "Chris, you're a weatherman. Here, it's time you start learning about physical activity and aging." And he gave me this publication to read. It's a fascinating publication. For those of you who have not read it, I would highly recommend it. In Disuse in Aging, Dr. Bortz identified that there are many, many similarities between processes that were occurring in the aging process, along with processes that were related to sedentary activities such as bed rest and space flight. In fact, indicated some data within that publication that VO2 max decreases significantly with bed rest, primarily due to a reduction in cardiac output. Cardiac output both based on a weakening of the heart muscle and a loss of blood volume associated with bed rest, and also seen in spaceflight as well. While at the same time, aging results in a loss of 1% of VO2 max per year. A similar, perhaps slower trajectory of decline than we see with bed rest and with spaceflight. However, a continuous decline. However, it was clear that those losses could be attenuated and in some cases even improved in individuals who were older and physically active, while accelerated in aging if an individual was highly inactive. Other findings included body composition. Astronauts lost almost 3 kilograms of muscle mass while they were in space. That's a lot of muscle. 8 grams of protein per day are wasted from the body during bed rest, essentially causing the potential of accelerated risk of sarcopenia, or loss of muscle mass that affects one's ability to live independently. In aging, we see the same sort of sarcopenia, yet active older adults are unlikely to have that issue. Why? Interesting. Similar parallels were also illustrated in bone status, glucose intolerance, cognitive function, a number of other physiological systems. I highly recommend reading the publication. And at the core of it was, he postulated, correctly might I add, that a physically active life could slow the attenuation of function and of vigor and could possibly even increase lifespan. A fantastic publication. Additionally, over the years, Dr. Bortz also authored other major publications, The Disuse Syndrome, Physical Exercise as an Evolutionary Force, and Aging is Entropy in Experimental Gerontology in 1986. Sounds like a good title for experimental gerontology, entropy. And in fact, entropy is this concept that ties specifically to fundamental laws that govern our universe. The laws of bioenergetics, or the laws of thermodynamics. And the second law of thermodynamics specifically states that as systems change over time, they tend to change by creating randomness, disorder, and chaos. I like this concept so much. I love bioenergetics so much that I've actually studied it in 2 different ways during the course of my life. Starting as a meteorologist, the weather is fundamentally example of bioenergetic events occurring. A lightning strike here that we see. A lightning strike is transferring energy from the sky to the ground. Sometimes the weather can express bioenergetic events in highly, highly violent and destructive ways. Now, what's interesting about these bioenergetic events, you know, when I was growing up in Massachusetts, we had a lot of them. We had hurricanes in the summer. We had blizzards in the winter. And really, ultimately, what it comes down to is that the atmosphere is attempting to find ways to modify and to exchange energy, or energy throughput, and be able to transfer energy so the world stays in a balance. Unfortunately, however, if there are too little bioenergetic transfers between the atmosphere and the Earth, we have events such as drought. Drought that is currently plaguing a large portion of the United States. We are now in a 35-year drought, according to the experts in California, where I live. For the first time in recorded history, there was no precipitation in the month of January recorded in San Francisco. That's troubling. Crops end up looking like that. It's not good. So that's with too little energy transfer, too little bioenergetic transformations occurring. On the flip side, if too many occur, devastation can occur. This is a photo just after the Joplin tornado several years ago, where devastation occurred. We can have floods, tsunamis, typhoons, twisters, when we have too much bioenergetic changes occurring within the atmosphere. However, we can also look at bioenergetics as it relates to the human body. Here we have Jesse Owens back in the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. He's finishing the gold medal winning 4x100 relay. And what he's expressing is a conversion of chemical energy stored in his muscles to mechanical energy to fuel him and to allow him to run down that track, ultimately win the gold medal, one of 4 that he had during that Olympics. But interestingly enough, this concept of as the human body goes through bioenergetic events, we also have the potential for there to be too little or too much with devastating consequences. In Aging is Entropy, Dr. Bortz talks quite a bit, although not in these specific terms, about an inverted U relationship between energy throughput or activity, or what we would call energy flux. How much energy is being transferred within the body, and the functional efficacy or capacity of the body. This, interestingly, was studied extensively on the far end of the spectrum by Dr. Hans Selye, a German physician, who started to notice that as Germany was building its industrial complex, he began to see workers coming into his clinic who all were presenting with the same symptomology. They were very ill. They couldn't get rid of their illnesses. They were displaying a very similar set of symptoms. And he developed what's known as the general adaptation syndrome, based on the fact that when the body is overstressed for significant periods of time, it eventually will break down. It can only handle that stress for a short period of time. I see this at University of San Francisco all the time. My students who work very, very hard in exercise physiology and nutrition and aging and physical activity courses, inevitably, during finals week, they start getting the sniffles. They start getting the coughs. And next thing you know, summer breaks here and they're sick for the first 2 weeks of it. How many of you have experienced experiences where there's been a lot of pressure on you for an extended period of time and you've handled it really, really well? But at the end of that stress, when the stressor is removed, you kind of crash. Let's see some hands. We've all been there. We've all been there. Michael Jordan, one of the greatest athletes of all time. Why on earth during the NBA playoffs was he in the hospital getting IVs because he essentially had pneumonia? He's a great athlete. He's an unbelievable physical specimen. But he stressed his body throughout the year to such an extent that eventually, being human, it began to break down. Interestingly, he would perform at his best in times where his body was betraying him the most. Well, Dr. Bortz focused on the other end of the spectrum and related this to the aging process. And the fact is, as individuals age, very often they adopt more and more sedentary lifestyles. And those sedentary lifestyles keep us away from being able to be at the peak of our functional efficacy. And the lethargy that is associated with physical inactivity leads to similar breakdowns in the body. We're not talking about things like tendinitis, plantar fasciitis, stress fractures that occur with overstress. Here we're talking about chronic diseases and the acceleration of those chronic diseases. So this inverted U of functional capacity is highly, highly related to energy flux and energy throughput. Finding the optimal amount of activity an individual should be engaging in order to get the correct response within the physiological systems. Fascinating piece of work. I recommend you also read Aging as Entropy. Well, Dr. Bortz isn't somebody who's going to be dealing with entropy anytime soon. Along with living his own life as an example of carrying the torch for exercise, he also has counseled patients over 40 years to walk that walk, to be physically active. In 1969, Dr. Bortz ran his first marathon. He's now completed 44 of them. Is that correct? 44? 44 marathons. And every day, he's a model of what a healthy aging process should look like. He communicates that to his patients when he works with his patients. He tries to communicate it to everyone he comes in contact with. And there's no question, if you've ever heard him speak or ever spoken with him personally, this is a man who truly does not just walk the walk, he runs the run. He carries that torch for physical activity. And that's just as important as the words that he writes. Another great quote that I love: when young, exercise is recommended. When old, exercise is imperative. We need to be physically active. There's no longer a choice. If you don't make that choice, we saw the consequences with the inverted U. You don't want to be on that far left side. So as Dr. Bortz's career has continued to evolve, he has started to develop and write fascinating books that are not only interesting from a scientific standpoint, but motivating and really just powerful for the human spirit. And the rest of this talk is going to be loosely structured on his book, Dare to Be 100. How many here have read Dare to Be 100? It's a fantastic book. I actually have it in my bag. It is available upstairs on the 3rd floor. I would highly recommend it. He also wrote another book, We Live Too Short and Die Too Long, discussing this concept of compression of morbidity and the fact that unfortunately many people do not have compression of morbidity and are sick many years prior to death. So the evolution of his legacy has gone from doing scientific specific work to advocacy. And we need more advocates for physical activity. We definitely need more models for physical activity and aging. And Dr. Bortz has embraced that. Now his Dare to Be 100 book is based on 4 primary tenets: D, A, R, and E. D, diet. A, attitude. It's always a good thing. R, recovery. I think I get that wrong, Walter. Renewal. Oh! And it was going so well. And E, exercise. I'm a kinesiologist, all right? Give me a break. Diet, attitude, renewal, and exercise. We're going to focus on the beginning and the end. We're going to focus on the D and the E. I'm just going to share with you a few other pioneering publications, just a brief overview of some publications that have made a major impact on what we know about diet and also about exercise, on health, on aging, and also what we're learning about longevity. Okay, so I'll quickly talk about these things. Let's start with the nutshell on nutrition. As we know, nuts are good for us, particularly walnuts and almonds. Eat them. There are a few studies that I'm going to touch on. I'll just briefly give you an overview of them. There'll be no quiz, unless you're taking the CEC course down the line, which case there will be. A very interesting recent study from Kim Stanhope at University of California, Davis, done on high fructose corn syrup. Let me briefly tell you about her study. She recruited 55 subjects. They were separated into 3 groups. Each group was consuming about 55% of their kcals from carbohydrate, a good standard amount of carbohydrate to be included in one's diet. However, the 3 groups were broken up 25% of the diet. Okay, so out of that 55% of carbohydrate, 25% was either coming from high fructose corn syrup, fructose itself, or glucose. 3 different forms of carbohydrate. And we've always heard that a calorie is a calorie is a calorie. This study actually indicated that perhaps we have to think about that a little bit differently. And I regard this as potentially a strong, pioneering piece of work that will continue the study of the adverse effect of sugar, particularly high fructose corn syrup, on the human body. So she broke 55 people up into these different groups. They stayed a few days at the Clinical Research Center at University of California, Davis. Then for a 12-day period, outpatient, they were required to consume a diet. And the diet they had drinks 3 times a day. It was either a high fructose drink, it was a fructose drink, or it was a glucose drink. Everybody was blinded. The subjects didn't know, the researchers didn't know. Then they came back for another 3 days inpatient, and they had a number of tests taken. And while they were being an inpatient, they also were on a specific diet. Very interestingly, some of the results indicated that the individuals who were on the high fructose corn syrup diet had a significantly elevated postprandial, which means following consumption of food and beverage, a higher triglyceride load in the blood, which we know is directly related to atherogenesis and progression of the atherosclerotic process, therefore enhancing the rate at which an individual may develop cardiovascular disease. That was significantly elevated over those that were consuming the other diets. Additionally, found that fasting low-density lipoprotein, LDL, bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol was elevated in those that consumed the high fructose corn syrup and the fructose diet, but not so in the glucose diet. Interesting. And in as little as 2 weeks, these results were found. I mean, that's kind of scary to think that just a modification, you go on a little bit of a bender, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to drink some Pepsi for the next 2 weeks because I love it. Just 2 weeks can make a huge impact on your potential risk for cardiovascular disease. Think about the implications of that. Those people that spend each day going out the door, driving with a big gulp from 7-Eleven, pounding their Mountain Dew, pounding their Coke, pounding their Hawaiian Punch, whatever it might be. It's worrisome. Another area that is generating a lot of buzz within the nutrition world and has for the last 20 years or so is omega-3 fatty acids. And this is another example of not all fats are created equal. Omega-3 fatty acids, found oftentimes in nuts and also high-fat fish. Studied by Burr, published in The Lancet in 1989. This was part of the DART trial, Dietary Approaches to Reinfarction. In this trial, he recruited over 2,000 men, middle-aged and older men, who had recently had a myocardial infarction, recently had a heart attack. And those individuals were put on a diet. Those diets were either a reduction in fat, a low-fat diet, a high-fish diet, or a high-fiber diet. And the tracking included reinfarction, how many of them had an additional heart attack, and also he tracked over a follow-up period of, I believe, 4 years, how many people died. What Burr actually found, following 2 years, all-cause mortality person dying from whatever reason was reduced by 29% in the fish consumption group only. A 29% reduction in all-cause mortality. And those individuals who are consuming a diet that was high in omega-3 fatty acids. There was no additional evidence to suggest that reinfarction or death because of reinfarction were related to the omega-3 fatty acid intake, but a 29% reduction in all-cause mortality is significant and noteworthy. So the question is why? What is it about omega-3 fatty acids that has an effect on the body? Well, interestingly enough, these are essential fatty acids. They must be found in our diet. Our body can't make them. Our body can make other fats, but our body cannot make these omega-3 fatty acids, and we derive substances from them. Our liver takes these fatty acids and creates what are called eicosanoids. Eicosanoids. And these are hormone-like substances that have a physiological effect within the body. And in the case of omega-3 fatty acids, the eicosanoids that are synthesized have anti-inflammatory, anti-clotting, and vasodilating effects, all three of which are strong promoters of health. Whereas if an individual consumes a diet high in omega-6 fatty acids, which we happen to see as a polyunsaturated fat associated with many meats, or saturated fats, we tend to see eicosanoids develop that are pro-inflammatory, that are vasoconstricting, and are pro-clotting. So just simply the type of fat one consumes has a major impact on their health and well-being. And now we see volumes and volumes of research specific to omega-3 fatty acids, even looking to effect on performance in athletes, looking to see if the vasodilation we do see associated with omega-3 fatty acid intake can have a positive effect either on exercise itself, recovery from exercise. Currently a lot of mixed results, but the ball is rolling thanks to a study by Burr back in 1989. Now recently, there's been a lot of talk about antioxidants. There is absolutely no question that a diet rich in antioxidants is a very good decision to make. However, we have to recognize that just like exercise, diet is not a cure for absolutely everything. There's a study recently published by Sheikh and a number of colleagues in 2013. And this study looked specifically at vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin C as antioxidants. Determined that vitamin D strongly decreases the inflammatory response within the body. Vitamin D now, and every vitamin kind of has its day. It's almost like watching the presidential primaries, right? Think back a few years ago. Presidential primaries, each guy kind of came up to the top and then he fell off. Well, vitamin E came out of the gates really strong. Oh, you'll never have a heart attack on vitamin Z, the best thing on the face of the earth. And the research didn't exactly bear that out. Vitamin D seems to have a fair amount of research that backs the fact that it has a very strong effect on mitigating inflammation within the body. And inflammation is related to so many chronic disease processes. Vitamin D. Vitamin C, an antioxidant that protects cell membranes from what's called lipid peroxidation, where we have free radicals that are formed as a part of normal daily life. We think of free radicals as like these horrible things that are invading us from the outside. And it's true, you can actually have a higher free radical load if you eat a diet that's high in charred foods, or if you're exposed to secondhand smoke or you smoke yourself. But being physically active creates more free radicals within your body because free radical production is a natural result of the oxidative energy production process. So it's like, oh man, should I not exercise then? Is this all bad advice?
Just don't breathe.
Just don't breathe. Well, yeah, just do sprints maybe.
Right.
The issue is adaptations within the body also allow you to be better at dealing with those free radicals. We can neutralize them more effectively. We actually adapt on the subcellular level to be able to handle those free radicals effectively. So the free radicals that are developed as a part of normal metabolism and exposure to things in the world, we want to try to help to reduce the risk of them affecting our bodies negatively. They can affect ultimately and damage DNA and lead to altered cell function, possibly even cell death. So Shake, what he did, he looked at some different free radical or some different antioxidants. Vitamin C is definitely known, not necessarily known by what mechanism, but it can reduce the severity and the duration of the common cold. Vitamin E does show some evidence to reducing the proliferation of what are called mast cells, these immune cells that result in an inflammatory response. So definitely good. However, just recently in Cochrane Reviews, and if you ever want to learn more than you ever wanted to learn, read some Cochrane Reviews. Okay, these are huge reviews and meta-analyses done, pulling together literally hundreds and hundreds of research studies. Well, Jelakovic in 2012 did an update to a previous Cochrane review that they did, and they wanted to look at antioxidant supplementation and the effect of antioxidant supplementation. So they did a meta-analysis where they throw all these studies together and run statistics on them on 78 randomized controlled trials, including almost 300,000 participants. That's a lot of math, okay? It's too much math for me. And found conclusively and interestingly that in some cases, antioxidant supplementation significantly increased mortality, increased the risk of death. It's worrisome. Found really no evidence for primary or secondary prevention utilizing antioxidant supplements. Beta-carotene and vitamin E supplementation did increase the risk of mortality, as did, in some studies, higher doses of vitamin A. So ultimately, we need to be careful when we're considering, hey, more of something is always going to be good. That inverted U we saw with physical activity, we can also apply to the fundamentals of nutrition. A balanced, healthy diet is always a great way to go. But don't go crazy on it. Okay, now that's going to bring me to nutrition and longevity. Really interesting study here, just recently came out from University of Wisconsin. Nutrition and longevity, Coleman study, specifically looking at rhesus monkeys. Would you believe that these two rhesus monkeys are the same age? Same age. This one's looking a little bit better than that one. Okay? Very fascinating. So rhesus monkeys typically live about 26 years old or so. About 10% of them make it to 35 years old. Maximum survival is about 40 years old for a rhesus monkey. Good to do longitudinal research on because it's about the length of a career, right? You can stop. It's like, I'm still working on the project. Sorry, you got to keep paying me. It's a great length, right? It's like the people who put together the Bay Bridge in San Francisco. Took like their entire career to do that. It's a good way to make a paycheck. So he studied these rhesus monkeys, and it had been demonstrated in smaller celled organisms that caloric restriction, approximately a 30% reduction in caloric intake, had beneficial effects on longevity. Incidentally, sterilization did the same. Okay? But when we talk about translational research from the bench to humans, I don't see a lot of people signing up for sterilization studies to live longer, right? I don't think that's going to go over too well. So he looked at a number of rhesus monkeys. And over the span of time, he ended up having these rhesus monkeys over about, a 3-month period or so, reach the desired, so they monitored them for several months and saw how these different monkeys were just consuming food ad libitum, how much they were taking in on their own without any force feeding, anything like that. And based on the amount of calories each of those monkeys took in, they titrated a portion of them down to be caloric restricted, and within 3 months, they were consuming 30% less calories than they had been consuming prior. Really interestingly, the results demonstrate, and fascinatingly enough, he didn't start with baby monkeys. He started these monkeys at 10 years of age. They were basically middle-aged monkeys, between 7 and 10 years old. Interestingly enough, age-related mortality. So when a monkey would die, they would do an autopsy on the monkey to determine what caused the monkey to die, and determine whether or not the death was related to an age-related cause or if the death was just random. Fascinating that age-related deaths decreased significantly in those monkeys that were on a diet that was calorically restricted. All-cause mortality also decreased significantly in those calorically restricted monkeys than the control monkeys. In fact, to the point where at the age of 35, there were hardly any control monkeys left, and there were almost half of the calorically restricted monkeys left. Fascinating stuff. And what's really interesting is this was demonstrated adopting that diet during the lifespan. So it starts to make us think, well, what about caloric restriction at any point in our lifespan? Something we should sign up for. There are a number of studies going on right now. One called the calorie study, which is caloric restriction in humans. And we'll see what those results look like. But studies like this start to give us an idea of what might be possible. And caloric restriction was shown even years ago. Okay.
Male monkeys or female?
They were specifically, I think they were male monkeys. They added 30 females. They started with males. 16 animals, males, then started with 30 females and added 16 more males. So it was a mix. So the take-home message is really make positive changes in one's diet. Make choices and have some guidance how to do so. Interestingly enough, if you're working with clients, patients, or people that you love and care about, you want to ensure that they make changes, but they make changes that can last. And there's recent evidence coming out of Stanford University that the best way to facilitate change is in really small increments. There's a researcher named B.J. Fogg, and he's come up with this concept of tiny habits. Tiny habits. If you want to affect behavioral change that actually has a chance to stick, particularly when it's a very challenging behavior to change, such as dietary changes or physical activity changes. Instead of going cold turkey, wholesale, all out, perhaps the best thing to do is to perform a tiny habit. Find an activity a person already does at least once a day. Someone probably already does eat at least once a day. Anchor a new activity that will take less than 30 seconds. Perhaps the person wants to drink more water. Okay. Chug a glass of water in 30 seconds at the end of your meal. Every time you have a meal. You're anchoring a new habit. And make sure that that habit requires very little effort so that it can become something that easily is worked into your regular day instead of requiring so much challenge. So consider perhaps tiny habits when you're working with your clients, your patients, yourselves, or your loved ones. A good place to start is what's called the prudent healthy diet. The prudent healthy diet, which is a recommendation coming specifically from the Dietary Guidelines for Healthy Americans. And there are a number of them, and you can read these. They all make sense. Balance food with physical activity, eat a wide variety of food, follow the guidance system that the government provides, moderate in fat but low in saturated fat, stay away from trans fat, the freaky fat that humans make. It's not good, Frankenstein fat. Choose a diet rich in fruits and vegetables. Provide us complex carbohydrates, fiber, phytochemicals. We're learning about all these small little chemicals that we never even knew existed that exist in foods that we eat, particularly fruits and vegetables, that protect those organisms when they're growing out in the world and protect us by consuming them. Fascinating stuff. Strive for a low intake of sugar. Sodium's important. Alcohol, always important, but do so in moderation. Lean sources of daily protein, all these things. And I think the last one that is so important, we sometimes forget to do, is enjoy our food. That's so important. You want to live a long life and one that's miserable, that doesn't exactly complete the A in dare. Your attitude will be pretty poor if you're not enjoying your food and enjoying your life. Now let's talk about the essentials of exercise. This is not a photoshopped picture. This woman is literally doing a suspended plank. It's crazy. Amazing. So let's talk about the essentials of exercise for a moment. Some studies that were very important in determining the relationship that physical activity has on different aspects of health. Cardiovascular training by Canoni back in 1991 in Medicine, Science, and Sports and Exercise recruited men and women 70 to 79 years old, so older adults. And they looked at 6 months of training, both resistance training and also endurance training. The resistance training was a single set of 8 to 12 repetitions on 10 different machine-based exercises. The endurance training progressed over the first month to exercising 75 to 85% of VO2 max for about 35 to 45 minutes, 3 days per week. And they sustained that exercise program for 6 months. It was found conclusively by Canoni that, number one, resistance training at that point in time was thought to be something that would increase blood pressure because we knew it increased blood pressure during exercise. So the thought was the adaptation was going to be a maladaptation. That if you work out, if you are a resistance-trained athlete or a person who's engaging in it, your blood pressure is going to increase during your regular day. This study actually showed that there was no effect of resistance training on an increase in diastolic or systolic or mean arterial pressure. So a positive finding. Since then, there have been studies that have actually demonstrated that resistance training can reduce blood pressure. It's possible that this study with one set of 8 to 12 repetitions on 10 machines perhaps wasn't enough of an actual load of exercise. The stimulus wasn't enough to generate a blood pressure response, but at least it didn't increase, so that was notable. Canoni's study also indicated that those individuals that engaged in endurance training, people that were normotensive, weren't hypertensive, experienced a 5 millimeter of mercury decrease in mean arterial pressure and a 4 millimeter of mercury decrease in diastolic blood pressure. So significant. And actually found those that were starting with a blood pressure of greater than 140/90 showed a decrease in mean arterial pressure, systolic and diastolic blood pressure close to 10 millimeters of mercury. Significant decrease, particularly as it relates to risk for cardiovascular disease. Some fantastic resistance training studies done back in the 1980s and 1990s, initially by Walter Frontera and Maria Fiatarone. These were benchmark studies that, as a graduate student, I remember reading about, and I couldn't believe what I was reading. It's amazing. Walter Frontera in 1985 in the Journal of Physical Activity, or Journal of Applied Physiology. He took 12 untrained volunteers in their 60s and early 70s. They had a 12-week training program where they were exercising at 80% of their 1 RM. They were doing 3 sets per day, 3 days per week. So it was a heavy resistance training protocol, and it had high frequency. So it was a high volume training. Those individuals improved strength, knee extension and knee flexor strength by 225% in 12 weeks. Additionally, thigh area increased by 5%. Total muscle area increased by 12%. And quadriceps cross-sectional area increased by almost 10%. Type 1 fibers hypertrophied by 33%. Type 2 fibers hypertrophied by almost 30%. A study that indicated that resistance training not only can improve strength, but actually has hypertrophic effects on skeletal muscle. Previously thought impossible. Maria Fiatarone, 1990, Journal of the American Medical Association. She took 10 institutionalized older adults in their 90s. Took people in their 90s. They undertook 8 weeks of high-intensity resistance training. They gained about 175% in strength, and also mid-thigh cross-sectional area increasing by 10% in people in their 90s. Amazing. Shows how adaptable the human body is, even as a nonagenarian. It's never too late. Balance training. Province published a meta-analysis, a pre-planned meta-analysis in JAMA in 1995 on the Fix-It trials, multi-center trial that was studying the effect of physical activity on falls. And this actually was a landmark study for me because that is my area of research, and reading the Fix-It trial studies made a huge impact on me. Made me recognize how essential it is, physical activity on the reduction of fall risk. And what these studies showed, all of the different 10 sites structured their exercise programs to a slightly different degree. Try to determine what are the factors that are most important when it comes to fall reduction and exercise. Found that these trials reduced fall risk significantly. And in fact, ones that included a balance component had an additional significant effect. This sort of a study has had major impacts in the past many years on other studies as well. They've taken multifactorial approaches. Let's look at sensory deficits. Let's look at home hazards. Let's look at medication management. All very important in exerting risks on falls as well. Mary Tinetti identified over 160 risk factors for falls. And there are a number of multifactorial interventions that can help to address those things. But one thing is clear, studies that came out of Australia with Day and Europe with Barnett indicated specifically that if a multifactorial study did not include exercise, it did no good. You need exercise to reduce the risk for falls, particularly exercise that involves balance training. Okay, and then let's talk a little bit about physical activity and its effect on longevity. Famous work by Jerry Morris back in the 1950s, published in The Lancet. Here we're in London. Tally-ho, everyone. We're in London where we've got a double-decker bus. And back in London in the 1950s, there were no apps where you could just swipe your little thing or have your iPhone just check yourself into the bus. There needed to be a driver and there needed to be a conductor. And the conductor was walking up and down the rows, up and down the stairs during their entire day, taking tickets, giving tickets, taking money. And Morris studied these London transportation workers and found that there was a significant decrease in risk of death. The drivers are the ones in white, and the conductors are the ones in gray. And basically, compared to the death rate of the conductors, it was found that the drivers, depending on what age they were, showed significant 3 times greater likelihood in the younger ones, 2 times greater likelihood in the middle-aged ones, 1.5 times greater likelihood for death in the older drivers versus the active conductors. Amazingly powerful information demonstrating that this concept of vocational or Dr. Levine, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, if you live a neat lifestyle, it will reduce your risk for death. These studies were also corroborated by research colleagues of Dr. Bortz's, Dr. Ralph Paffenbarger, William Haskell, people down at Stanford who studied longshoremen in San Francisco and studied Harvard alumni. I went to Cornell, so I like watching about mortality of Harvard alumni. It's something I enjoy. I'm like, oh, that's too bad. Another one bites the dust. All supported the fact that being physically active reduced one's risk of all-cause mortality. Powerful. Truly, exercise is medicine. Take-home message there. Absolutely, positively, just do it. But again, perhaps in really small increments. Don't start new with the client who's sedentary, might be older, and try to immediately get them onto, hey, I'm going to first functional movement screen you. I'm going to start with that, and we're going to do some work on the BOSU. Yeah. We'll have you in great shape in no time. Let's be intelligent with the way that we proceed with these individuals. One of his famous lines, Dr. Bortz, and this is absolutely my favorite. It's never too late to start, as demonstrated in the study by Fiatarone, the people in their 90s. But it's always too soon to stop. I might not be a Trekkie, but I'm proud to be a Bortzy. Thank you very much. Walter, would you come up? Dare to be 100, everybody. Thank you.
Hi, Bill. A little bit.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Well, you know what they did? They fired the conductor so they wouldn't put such a drain on the electric system.
May we get a picture, Walter and I?
Well, yeah, we're video.
That would be great.
That's why I ran up this direction, because I wanted to do something like that. We don't have a whole lot of light, but we've got you on there.
That's good.
That's great, yeah.
Fabulous job. Thank you.
You're welcome, Walter. Thank you. You're an inspiration. Do you have plans for lunch?
How about dinner?
Dinner's great.
Could I take you and your lady friend to dinner?
She's getting in at like 7:15. I'm not sure if she'll be, but if you don't mind a little bit of a later or maybe a drink after dinner,
I can't do that. But you,
we'll go to dinner together. Let's meet at the Hyatt. What time?
anytime you say.
How about 6:30 in the lobby of the Hyatt?
6:30 in the lobby.
All right. Thanks, Walter. Looking forward to it. Was that all right?
It was awesome, man. I'm proud of you. It was awesome. That was really good.
Thank you.